What's up, everyone? It's Brian from Exact IT and Cybersecurity. Welcome to another Cybersecurity Roundup. We haven't done one of these in about 9 or 10 days, and I like to just kind of go through some cyber attack news that I don't cover in longer form videos like we did with the 3 other videos we released this week that talked about one specific topic. So check out those 3 videos. We don't want to waste your time, so if you see something down in the description below, everything's timestamped so you can skip to the stuff that you care about and skip over the stuff that you don't care about. You're welcome. The first one on the list for today is the Metro down in Washington, D.C. experienced a cybersecurity attack, which resulted in their website being down for several hours. It appears that the Metro website experienced what's known as a denial of service attack, and that's when attackers basically turn a bunch of computers against a particular website or IP address or server, and they overload that server with so much traffic that it cannot handle the normal website requests like visitors like you and me when we're trying to look for information on trains. We can't see those pages because of all this activity that's going on. Typically what we see are cyber criminals demanding a ransom to stop the activity so the website can be operational again. And it appears that the Metro enlisted the help of some cybersecurity experts, and they were able to get their site back up and running fairly quickly. And now the Metro is working with law enforcement to try to determine who was behind the attack. Seemed like it could have been a bigger deal than it was, more of a business disruption than anything. It's believed that no information or anything was accessed. Typically, anybody's really susceptible to a DDoS attack unless you're proactive and you put certain defenses up that mitigate the success a criminal group might have against you in one of these types of attacks. A majority of the companies that are out there today are susceptible to this in some way, shape, or form. It can be something that can be quite an expense to mitigate if you want to try to get ahead of it, or there are very different ways you can handle doing this depending on whether it's your website, it's your own company's internal network. Like it usually is with this stuff, it just depends, but there are ways you can deal with it if you're willing and able to invest in doing that. The other somewhat big news of the week is the FBI seizing this breach forms website out on the dark web that is used to leak stolen data by cyber criminals. A pretty big disruption and a pretty big story. Something I might actually do a separate story on down the road, but as we are just learning about this in the early stages, we might learn a lot more, and there could be potential more information about this site, law enforcement being more involved with this site than was previously first thought. But it is a very popular site for scammers and cyber criminals to sell all kinds of information and leak data, and they recently released data on Europol, and it is believed because that data was released, law enforcement turned up the heat on this website and decided to go after it. And they have their markings all over the place. They've taken over the website. They've put up what could be looked at as provocative messaging, as they have the avatars of the 2 owners of the website also on the information website page that's on this website now. When you go there, it's an FBI picture, and you have the picture of the 2 avatars of the owners behind bars or in jail, so to speak, on the website. So law enforcement is asking you to reach out to them with information, but law enforcement is also letting everyone know that they basically have all the information, which means they could have email addresses, they could have IP addresses, they could have all kinds of information about people who were doing activity on this website. So we will see what information they're able to get from it, what kind of law enforcement actions they are able to pursue as a result of this. We will certainly keep you updated, but this is a big win for law enforcement when it comes to curtailing any of the byproducts from all these cyber attacks and all of this information that we see being stolen by cyber criminals that I've been warning about for months now, that this is going to be used against individuals here in the near future at a pace and a frequency that we've never seen before. And things like this, it's a big road bump for those guys trying to run these scams and steal people's identity and things like that. So it'll be very interesting to see where this goes in the near future for this group. Or is it just a minor speed bump where they just, spin up a new site somewhere else and the activity continues? That is certainly a possibility. We'll keep you informed as we know more. And also this week we have news on on the Black Basta ransomware group. They caught the attention of CISA and the FBI and HHS this week, causing those organizations and the US government to release bulletins about this group because they see them attacking organizations, especially in healthcare, at a rapid pace. Well, funny enough, we hear that the Ascension hospital ransomware attack, which we did a video on, is potentially the work of the Black Basta ransomware group. The other interesting thing is now we have reports of some Black Basta ransomware group activity and how they impact users and how they actually deploy their ransomware. And we have a story of Windows Quick Assist being abused heavily by Black Basta in their attacks. Companies do things, or they try to do the right thing, and they get the cyber insurance, or they're under some kind of compliance, and they're being told like, hey, you got to have that security awareness training program in place. You got to train your employees and make sure that they're not the reason that you fall victim to an attack, right? And you train your employees like you're supposed to, and you give them that training. That training teaches them how to spot a fish, what to look out for, and they're pretty well trained. If you're doing one of these programs, it's a pretty good chance that if your employees are taking it seriously, they know how to spot a phishing email. They know what it looks like and they know what to do. And what we try to warn companies all the time though is, yeah, those training programs are great, but you have to understand the threat landscape is very much a cat and mouse game out there with cyber criminals. They are paying attention to what you are teaching your employees every step of the way. So when your employees learn something and they are trained to look out for something, more than likely cyber criminals are already aware of this and they're already pivoting to something else. And you see that here with this Black Basta ransomware group. And this is kind of how this group gets and takes advantage of companies both big and small. And I'm going to break it down for you. While they still use phishing, they're doing it with a twist. And here's what they're doing. So when we break it down, this is more of a social engineering attack than it is a phishing attack, but they use phishing as a key component of this social engineering attack. And it starts off with users, your employees. You could be a business owner of a small business, and you start all of a sudden receiving massive amount of spam email to the tune of maybe hundreds, or maybe you get 20 an hour, or maybe even 30 or 50 an hour, and they keep coming and they keep coming and they're not stopping. And because you don't really have a good spam filtering system in place, you're seeing these emails. There's probably something else that you're doing that you may want to consider making a policy that you don't do in your company and you don't do it yourself. And that's when you get an email and those images load up automatically when you click on an email. Yeah, I know it's inconvenient, but if you don't have that turned on, then hackers will never know that you're reading that email, right? So, and that's part of this scam, right? As I lay this out for you, one thing you have to understand and you have to know is that more than likely, because this is such an automated process at this stage where they're just blasting people with massive amounts of spam, they don't know if you're really reading those or seeing those messages, if they're making it through your spam filters. But if you have images turned on automatically to be downloaded in your email client, like most people that we encounter do, then it also can load an image that a hacker is tracking to see if you're opening emails. And look, if they get a little kind of message, a little alert sent to them saying like, Brian read your message. Well, guess what? If he has my cell phone number, because it's out there on the dark web, he can start calling me, bothering me, and trying to get me to pick up. And maybe I get annoyed, maybe I pick up, and maybe I'm just the type of person that picks up whoever calls me. In any event, the way that these scams are going down with Black Basta is they're calling your employees, they're calling you, they're calling the individual who's receiving all these spam email messages, and they're basically saying like, hey, I'm from Microsoft, hey, I'm from your IT help desk, and guess what? We're detecting that you're getting all of these phishing emails from so-and-so, from this, and we need to help you stop that. And that's how this scam starts. When they get you on the phone and they tell you, we are going to help you stop these messages coming in, and they get unsuspecting victims who aren't trained, who don't know to look for these types of situations, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm getting these spam emails, guys calling me from the IT help desk, sure, yeah, and then they go and take it a little bit further. There's this little tool called Quick Assist built into Windows. It's enabled by default, and if you're doing your IT and your security the right way, we would highly recommend that you figure out a way to disable this tool in your organization and don't allow it to run at all. Users should not be able to make this tool run, but if you don't take the proactive steps to disable it or run tools that don't allow it to run at all, which is what we highly recommend that you do, then users are going to be able to run this tool. So when they're prompted to run the a tool by the fake IT guy that is really the cyber criminal from one of the Black Basta affiliate groups that's trying to break into your computer network so they can deploy this Black Basta ransomware. They get you to run this quick assist, and that's how they get remote access to this tool. So they use your unsuspecting employee, they use you before you watch this video and you are aware that this could go down like this. This is what they're doing to trick users and deploy their ransomware today. So these are the things that you have to watch out for. The cat and mouse game, they're always one step ahead, trying to defeat your defenses, defeat your security and awareness training. This is why you need to have multi-layers to your defenses. Not just one, not just two, not just three. You gotta have multi-layers to stop these guys because they can exploit 0 days, which I'm gonna talk about in a minute, or they can exploit your employees who just aren't trained to look for these types of scams as they come at them like this. CISA doesn't put bulletins out like this for no reason. This is organization, Black Basta, is very good at what they do. As you can see, as I've laid it out for you, this is their latest way of getting in. They've adapted and they will continue to adapt. As in the 2 years that this group's been in existence, they've managed to breach over 500 organizations with ransomware. They basically hit an organization a day. Not too shabby if you ask me. And to make things even more interesting, on the heels of Lockbit's administrator being announced, which I covered in a video this week, we also see one of the largest and most successful botnets, and these botnets are basically computers set up all around the world to do various things like send out phishing emails. And one of the most successful botnet phishing networks out there just recently started sending Lockbit emails out of their system. So millions and millions of phishing emails going out with a Lockbit attachment, and it's leaving some security researchers actually a little bit puzzled because it's a fairly unsophisticated type of phishing campaign that's being sent. It's basically a zip file coming from one sender, I think it was named Jenny Brown or Jenny Green or both, and it's coming from unique IP addresses and stuff, so it makes it a little bit difficult for some spam filters that aren't very good to kind of keep up and maybe block some of these, but they are getting through, and it does have the Lockbit ransomware attached to it in a zip file. So if they can trick a user into running it somehow, we're going to see a big uptick in Lockbit ransomware attacks as a result of this. And yes, a lot of these are going to hit very small companies, but in any event, these emails are going out by the millions. They could get lucky, they could hit a big company, or they could hit an affiliate of a big company, and then it could become a really big mess. But security researchers have revealed that this is going on out there, and that this botnet is sending out these emails with this payload that has the Lockbit ransom attached to it. And in other ransomware news this week, it's been reported that Inc. ransomware source code is selling for $300,000 on the hacking forums sites on the dark web. Somebody has this out there for sale. So what does this potentially mean? Well, A, it means that, one, if this is a legitimate offering, that the person behind this really has the source code for this ransomware, and they do end up selling it to people, $300,000, it's not like that's chump change. That, any script kiddie has this laying around, a low-level criminal has $300,000 that they can just access. So, it's being targeted to a certain group. In my opinion, it's either going to be an up-and-coming group that is trying to kind of enhance themselves, so they might have the resources. Maybe they've hit a few companies with what they have, and they want to look at this code, or they know that this code can help them improve. Or it's an already established group that wants to use this code with their current ransomware or integrate it in some way to really just, obfuscate themselves or make things harder for law enforcement at the end of the day to help out and step in. There are various reasons why this could sell and who they could sell it to, but it only muddies the water if it's legitimate. The hope is that it's not a legitimate seller and that this person's just out on the dark web trying to scam people who might potentially want this source code, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens, but it is interesting because it kind of gives you a perspective of what happens on the dark web and the web of business and how things are working between the different groups and different threat actors that are out there. It's not cut and dry. It's not like people are just sitting there making software and deploying it. There's a whole ecosystem of people buying and selling source code and things that they can do, breaking into networks, and all kinds of business transactions that are illegal happening out on the dark web. And there's not a whole lot law enforcement can do about it because of the anonymity the dark web provides. So that's it for the ransomware coverage for this week. I'm going to get into some 0 days that happened this week. It was reported this week that Microsoft Microsoft released their May 2024 patch update, which included 3 0-day fixes and 61 flaws, I believe it was. But the interesting thing is one of those 0-day fixes was a Quackbot malware fix. So this was a vulnerability exploited in attacks to deliver Quackbot and other malware payloads on vulnerable Windows systems. So Quackbot is a malware that's used by a lot of cyber criminal groups, especially when they're breaking in the networks before they deploy ransomware. It's essentially a bug, and it basically allows attackers to gain system privileges, full takeover privileges. They can basically do whatever they want on the system once they have access to it. So the interesting thing about this one is that they found it because they were coming through data during an investigation. And as they were coming through that data, they were looking at exploits related to associated attacks, and they stumbled upon a file that was uploaded to VirusTotal on April 1st, 2024. And the file's names hinted that it contained details on a Windows vulnerability. And then it's been reported that as they discovered, the file provided information regarding the Windows Manager, which is the vulnerability that was discovered and corrected here. Once they kind of were tipped off and pointed in this direction, security researchers from various large tech organizations were kind of clued in and tuned into this particular vulnerability, which was patched this week. This vulnerability in particular has been used in the wild in the past against companies. It's pretty much being told by Microsoft that you need to push this and update your systems as soon as possible. Another interesting exploit this week that was announced could impact companies who have remote workers. This is an interesting dilemma that companies have to deal with when they have remote workforces and hybrid workforces, is the security of your company's assets, whether you deliver laptops to your computers or they use their own to access things that are in the cloud. You still have certain risks and vulnerabilities that you have to consider and look at no matter how you do it. And in this case, you might be concerned if you give your laptops or you give computers to your employees and let them take them home and work home, and they have something like a D-Link EXO AX4800 router in their house, which can be taken over by cyber criminals. Now, most businesses aren't going to use a router like this. These are things that you buy in Best Buy. While we have seen certain small businesses do have things like this in their buildings, most fairly decent sized businesses are not going to have this device in their office or in their operations. But the risk does get introduced when you allow people to work from home and these devices exist. The router is vulnerable to remote, unauthenticated command execution that could lead to complete device takeovers by attackers. Basically, what they're saying is that these devices could be sitting in your employees' homes and they could be taken over by cyber criminals over the internet if they have a certain remote management port. Why do I want to talk about this? Well, I want to talk about this because it's important for companies to consider policies that their employees do certain things with their home equipment if they're going to allow them to work from home. And I know this sounds like a little bit intrusive or a little bit of a problem, but unless you're using certain technologies that can isolate that computer or that endpoint from the rest of the devices in a person's home, which there are technologies that do exist that do allow you to achieve that. So if you're interested in learning more about that, there's links below in the description where you can contact my company, Exact IT Solutions, to get more information on something like that that can help your business for remote workers. If you don't have something like that in place, then you need to consider things like having policies in place where you require certain standards in order for them to work. We've seen it where companies send firewalls and certain things to companies in addition to laptops just to control this a little bit. Now that might be a little bit crazy for this, depending on how many employees you have and things like that, but we have seen it for companies that have, say, 20 or 30 employees, for them to invest in 20 or 30 of the same firewall and allow their own IT to help manage that just in the name of security. And obviously there's definitely a lot of things that need to be put in place in terms of policies and agreements as to what you can and can't do with that device from a company standpoint and the employee standpoint. At the end of the day, it can be achieved. Not the easiest thing to do, though. There are easier solutions in my opinion. But at the end of the day, companies need to think about this stuff. They need to think about whether or not they want to have a policy that tells employees you need to make sure you don't have things like remote management enabled on your routers, which needs to be in place for this to even be a thing for these routers. But if you don't allow these routers to be managed over the internet, then you don't have to worry about this exploit. But if you do, and you may not know it's even turned on by default, some routers, hey, they come with it turned on automatically. Some others, you have to go in and turn it on explicitly. It just depends on the manufacturer. There's no standard. There's no government regulator telling these router manufacturers that has to be turned off by default. Sometimes to make it easy for you, the end user, so you don't have to be a techno genius to run these devices, they make it easy. They turn it on by default. That's usually what happens. And when they make things easier for users, it usually introduces security risks like this. So users, if you have a D-Link AX4800 router in your house, you want to log into that thing. Number one, make sure your username and password has been updated from the default. And number two, make sure you turn off remote management so you don't get exploited by this vulnerability that D-Link has yet to put out a patch for yet. And that's the other thing. If once they do put out a patch, you got to make sure that this patch gets applied to this router, because they don't always happen automatically. They're not always set up to be updated by default. So these are things you need to go in, you need to log in and check to see if there's a way that you can update it. And moving on to our last topic of today, guys, this Singing River Health System, the data of 895,000 people was stolen in their ransomware attack. So the numbers just keep going up with the amount of Americans and people around the world whose information is just being loaded into the databases of cyber criminals who then go and sell this stuff on the dark web. They suffered this ransomware attack back in August of 2023, and they're now announcing 8 months later that about 900,000 people's information was impacted, private health information. That's going to be employees as well as patients who are going to be in this data set. And these are the things that we hear, and this is the way that we hear them months and months later. And the fallout and the things that this hospital is going to have to deal with is going to extend into the years. So they're going to be dealing with class action lawsuits, making sure that this information is protected. And when people do start to see that they're having a problem, this hospital is going to have to provide them with help and protection through identity theft remediation and monitoring and things like that. So all those things cost money, and either the patient is going to end up footing the bill for that, or they're going to do what most people do, is join a class action lawsuit and get some compensation for these things, which the hospital has to then pay millions of dollars for, unfortunately. Again, another hospital like we see with Ascension this week, where this fallout with Ascension is going to go into the months and years, just like we're seeing with this hospital system and every other hospital system that gets attacked by these cyber criminals. We need to do more. We need to do more to protect our infrastructure around the country. Our critical infrastructure is getting attacked like crazy, and those are the unfortunate ones in terms of the PR standpoint, because they're the ones that more than likely have to report it. Other businesses are getting hit at the same rate, America, and businesses, private businesses, are getting hit all the time. You just aren't hearing about it. Like we covered the Wichita, Kansas story, and not a lot of people are hearing about that one, but that's a pretty big ransomware attack that's in the news. Well, let me tell you, there's many more cyber attacks that are happening that aren't making the news, that you aren't hearing about, that I'm not covering on this channel. They're not being reported. Most people don't even know outside of the company and their close family members. That's the reality of what's going on out there. It's unfortunate. We're losing the war because companies are not doing enough to protect your data. So I implore you to start doing things like locking your credit file, monitoring your credit, making sure that your identity isn't being stolen. Make sure that you have dark web monitoring going on, and we can do that for companies here at Exact. You can also get that personally on your credit report through companies like Experian. I highly recommend you start paying attention to this stuff, because cyber criminals are abusing it at a rapid level today because of all these cyber attacks. I'm Brian. I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe out there, and if you need help with any of this, please reach out to us. Links down below in the description. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that alert bell if you want to be alerted when we put out new videos just like this one. Take care, everyone.